Hi all, welcome to another video, and in this video I'll share a little bit about what service mesh is. Now, before I go on to that, recently I got some feedback from someone who watches my videos, and the feedback was that there's quite a bit of echo in the room where I'm recording the video, so my voice isn't always very clear. And the other feedback that I got was that it would be better if I try to keep my videos in a question answer format. So there's a bit more structure to it, and so I don't I don't go off a tangent and start talking about things that are not quite important. I'm not entirely sure if I've mentioned this in one of my earlier videos, but anyway, so I'm going to try and address that. I'm going to try and address some of that feedback, starting by the question answer. So maybe I'll just post that one big overarching question at the start of the video, like I've done in this video, in terms of what service mesh is. I'll try to do that for starters. Now the other thing is, in terms of the echo in the room and all that, unfortunately at this stage there isn't much I can do about it. So for the next couple of videos there may be those with some echo, so please just bear with me until I get some of this stuff sorted. All right, cool. So moving on. So what is service mesh? Now, you see, I always find it very difficult to describe this, and always found it difficult to describe it in my words. So unless I'm actually quoting from something that's written online, I found it difficult to actually put this in my words. So I'll give it a shot. Now, service mesh is so in one of my jobs, in one of the places where I worked before, it was used very heavily. Now, okay, so moving on, let me think of how I can put it now. You can think of service mesh as some sort of infrastructure. It's like an infrastructure layer, but infrastructure layer is not in terms of hardware, but just in terms of software. Now, so it's a layer of software, and now, if that's the way you could put it. So let me try and describe this a bit more. You see, service mesh. I suppose you could also call it like an architecture style, or and this is something that actually came to be, with the microservices architecture being as prominent as it is right now. Back in the day, heaps of companies, we were always like building monoliths and stuff, right? So we've just got this one software. Maybe it's a modular monolith. It's all the components are segregated nicely within that software, but then we have different modules that sort of communicate with each other or are independent but can send messages to each other and all that. But still, the core of it was all of them, they operate from the same app. Like it's just one big app. It's decomposed into modules, so it's loosely, but it's one app. Then came microservice architecture. Now with microservice architecture, you deploy like a bunch of independent services. Like these are, like, you can think of them as like APIs, right? So you've got an API for okay, let's say like a banking app. How about, yeah, let's talk about banking app. Say for example, you've got a bunch of different functionalities in there, right? Like you've got things like when you've got like the user, say you'd have in the typical microservice architecture, you'd have like a user service, then you have like an account service or something that retrieves the user account, or something like a withdrawal service, or a payment service or something like that. And obviously, so you to actually build a backing for a banking app, you would actually create a set of these microservices. Now these microservices are just APIs. Let's say that we're talking about the backend here, so these are all APIs, right? And they're always and these APIs are the ones that do the work that the app or the front end needs it to do. So like I said, like in terms of the withdrawal service or the balance service or so on and so forth, so at any given point, since you've got this since you're all running deployed independently, at any given point, if the demand increases for one service, we can scale that particular service only. So for example, I'm actually doing a terrible job of this in terms of using banking as a real life example. But say you've got like a sale happening. Say for example, what do we have? We've got Boxing Day sale here in Australia. Like Boxing Day sale is essentially like the 26th of December, where we've got heaps of sales, heaps of good discounts. Say it's Boxing Day, and then obviously there's heaps of people, lots of people going out there to shops like brick and mortar stores, and then they're buying all of these things, right? They're buying all these items and they're making payments. So at that point, you'd want to increase you'd want to increase like the resources for the payment service. So and that's it, just a payment service. But things like the user service, where the users log in, you don't need to worry about that, because there's more rights happening in terms of payment. There's more activity just for payments, and not so much as users editing the information or new users being added. So that in a sense is a microservice architecture, and then it helps us. It just solve the problem. It solves is that you can actually improve performance of your systems. So with all of this it's with the microservices architecture being as widely used as it is now, comes its own set of challenges. And one of the challenges would be, say, like you've got all these services, right? Like the user service, the payment service, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, all of these independent services, they are part of the same app. So obviously at some point, these services would need to communicate with each other. Now, to communicate with each other, in terms of communicating with each other, that itself adds its own set of challenges. Now, when one service, say service A, talks to service B, now what about like the security, and what if something fails? Like one of the most critical aspects is that say for example the payment, and if it fails, so what's going to happen? So we'll obviously need to keep track of some sort of we need to do some logging and all that, right? Like in terms of we need to log like when did the payment start, or just some information around like the event that caused the failure, and the series of events leading up to that failure. And obviously when the services communicate with each other, the security is also quite important, because if service A can invoke service B, can anyone invoke service B? No, like you've got to be careful. So you need to set up security around that, and that's where service mesh comes in. So that's the problem that service mesh solves, like service to service communication. So if you think about it, the service mesh is like a software layer in which you have heaps of services. And now for all of these things that I mentioned, like security, logging, and all this other admin stuff, sysadmin stuff, if that's how you call it, what you would have in service mesh is each service would have what you call a sidecar proxy, which handles all of those things that I just talked about. So that's what it handles, and so that's how it's. And then in terms of the service to service communication, typically it will be using the way it's relative to how service mesh would be set up, but then it's mostly one of the common ways of setting it up would be using mutual TLS. So MTLS, mutual TLS auth. If you want to know more about mutual TLS auth, you can actually do an online search. and then find out more about it, or leave a comment, and I'm happy to share talk a bit more about that. It's just, exchanging of certificates to know you are who you say you are. Right, so it would do all that, and that's and typically what would happen is, before anything comes to before a request comes to any of these services within the service mesh, it would first go to an API gateway, and the API gateway is what will determine, like, it'll do some work on its own in terms of finding out what's the where it's which service is busy, which node is busy, which node is free. And it will also do what we call like a service discovery. I mean, that's one of the things that it could potentially do. So yeah, and then it will send a request to once it does that, it will send that request to the appropriate service to actually serve that, to process that request. That service which gets the request will process that request, and then it will send it back through the sidecar proxy. Oh, even when the request comes into that service, it will come through that sidecar proxy that I mentioned earlier. When the response goes out, it will go through that sidecar proxy as well, and then it will be relayed back to the client. So that, in a sense, is how service mesh works. So that's a gist of it, and I've tried as much as I can to sort of keep it, without making it too formal, or I've tried to keep it as much as I can just in layman's terms, so that everybody can understand. Now, examples of a service mesh implementation would be Istio, Istio. So if you do an online search for Istio, you find out about it, and I'm happy to put a link to Istio in the description of this video. And in terms of the API gateway that I just talked about, now for the API gateway, some of the examples of API gateways are Kong, and actually now these are the API gateways that I know because I've worked with them in one of my previous roles. So actually it's cool because actually was that's what we were using at my one of my former companies to generate credentials. So an API gateway it's also responsible for like security, authentication, all of that. So yeah, I'll try to put a link for API gateways, Kong, X-Ray, all of that in the description of this video. So there's more that you can read, and if you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment or even send me an email. My email address is like my first name dot last name at gmail.com. So it's like booman.sony@gmail.com. Let me say that again. It's booman.sony@gmail.com. Oftentimes when I say my name, it just comes out so Australian, really, like Booman. It's Booman. So it's BHUMAN.SONI@gmail.com. So yeah, send me an email or leave a comment, and I'll try to respond to you as soon as I possibly can. I mean, yeah. I hope you enjoyed watching this video and hope you've learned something. Until next time, I wish you well and live long and prosper.